Giant Apache bought a girl from child labor. That's where it all began. When one man's simple act of kindness sparked a fight that would shake the very foundations of a town. But no one could have predicted the fire inside the girl he saved. A fire that would soon burn through everything they thought they knew. As forces beyond their control close in, they'll face impossible choices, with everything on the line. When courage and compassion collide with power and greed, who will stand for justice? And who will be left standing when the dust settles? Stay tuned to find out what happens next. Every story begins with a heartbeat. Tell me, where are you in the world today? And how are you really doing? Your words make this space feel more human. The bell above the general store's door jangled, its cheerful tone at odds with the somber atmosphere inside. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight that filtered through grimy windows, illuminating shelves of dented cans and faded cloth. The floorboards creaked under Tashunka's steady footsteps as he entered, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the worn wooden floor. Children scurried between the aisles, their small hands busy with tasks no child should bear. Their faces were drawn and tired, eyes downcast as they worked. In the corner, a young woman stood sorting through a pile of goods, her movements mechanical and resigned. Anna May's dark hair fell forward, partially hiding the bruise on her cheek. Tashunka's jaw tightened as he watched her work. He'd heard whispers in town about Morton's store and his workforce of orphaned children, but seeing it with his own eyes made his heart heavy. The shop owner, Morton himself, emerged from behind the counter, his belly straining against a greasy vest. "What do you want, Indian?" Morton's voice carried the sharp edge of contempt. Tashunka kept his voice level, though his hands clenched at his sides. "I've come about the girl." He nodded toward Anna May, who had frozen at the sound of their voices. Morton's laugh was ugly. "She ain't for sale. None of 'em are. They work for their keep, fair and square." "There's nothing fair about this," Tashunka said quietly, his eyes never leaving Anna May's rigid form. "I'll pay you for her freedom." The businessman's eyes narrowed with calculation. "Even if I was minded to sell, you couldn't afford her. She's worth too much to my business." Tashunka reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. The coins inside clinked as he set it on the counter. Morton's eyes widened at the sound. "This is more than fair payment," Tashunka said, "for her freedom." Anna May had turned to watch now, her hands trembling as she clutched a tin can to her chest. The other children had stopped their work too, gathering in small clusters to witness the exchange. Morton dumped the coins onto the counter, greed overtaking his initial disdain. His fingers moved quickly, counting and recounting the sum. "Where'd you get this kind of money, Indian?" "That's not your concern," Tashunka replied. "Do we have an agreement?" Morton swept the coins into his hand, his decision made. "Take her then. She's yours." He jerked his chin toward Anna May. "Girl, get your things. What little you got." Anna May didn't move at first, her eyes wide with disbelief and fear. She looked from Morton to Tashunka, uncertainty written across her features. "It's your choice," Tashunka said softly, meeting her gaze. "You're free now. You can go wherever you want." The can slipped from Anna May's fingers, rolling across the floor. The sound seemed to break her trance. She hurried to the back room, emerging moments later with a small bundle wrapped in faded cloth. The other children watched silently as she made her way to the door, some with envy, others with worry for their friend. A small girl reached out and caught Anna May's hand, squeezing it quickly before letting go. Tashunka held the door open, and Anna May stepped out into the sunlight. She blinked rapidly, as if the brightness hurt her eyes, or perhaps she was holding back tears. "I don't understand," she whispered, her voice rough from disuse. "Why would you do this?" "Because no one deserves to live in chains," Tashunka answered, his voice gentle but firm. "Whether they're made of iron or circumstance." Anna May clutched her bundle tighter, her knuckles white. "I don't know where to go. I've never—" She trailed off, looking lost on the dusty street. "There's work at the Double Creek Ranch if you want it," Tashunka offered. "Real work, with fair pay, your own cabin, your own life." She looked up at him then, really looked at him for the first time. In his eyes she saw no cruelty, no hidden agenda, only a steady kindness that made her throat tight with unexpected emotion. "I've never been free before," she admitted, her voice barely audible. "I'm not sure I know how." "You'll learn," Tashunka said simply, "day by day." They stood there for a moment in the morning sun, an unlikely pair, the tall Apache man and the small, uncertain woman, while behind them the store's bell jangled again, marking the end of one life and the beginning of another. The sun hung low in the western sky as Tashunka led Anna May along a narrow dirt path. His modest cabin came into view, nestled against a backdrop of towering pines. A small corral housed 2 horses, their tails swishing lazily in the evening air. Anna May's footsteps faltered as they approached. Her bundle, containing everything she owned in the world, felt heavier with each step. The cabin, though simple, looked solid and well-maintained. A thin trail of smoke curled from the stone chimney. "It ain't much," Tashunka said quietly, "but it's warm and dry." Inside, the cabin was neat and orderly. A wood stove occupied one corner, its heat making the small space cozy. A rough-hewn table stood in the center, while a narrow cot lined the far wall. The scent of coffee and wood smoke filled the air. "You can take the bed," Tashunka said, moving to the stove. "I'll sleep by the fire." Anna May stood frozen near the door, her heart pounding. The kindness in his voice made her throat tight. She'd never known a man to give up his bed before. "I couldn't," she started, but Tashunka was already pulling ingredients from a shelf. "You need rest," he said simply. "When did you last eat?" She couldn't remember. The store owner had been stingy with food, treating it like a privilege rather than a necessity. Her stomach growled at the smell of beans warming on the stove. As Tashunka prepared their meal, he began to speak softly about his past. "I worked for a rancher named Carl McAllister," he said, stirring the pot. "Good man. Saw me as a person, not just an Indian. Taught me everything about running cattle." Anna May settled cautiously at the table, drawn in by his steady voice. "Why did you leave?" "Needed to find my own way," he replied. "McAllister understood. Still helps me when I need it. Some folks in town don't like seeing an Apache succeed, but he stands by me." The beans were served in tin bowls, accompanied by thick slices of bread. Anna May ate slowly, savoring each bite, while guilt gnawed at her conscience. "The other children," she whispered. "I left them behind." Tashunka's dark eyes met hers across the table. "You can't help them if you're trapped yourself. Getting free, learning to stand on your own, that's the first step." After dinner, Anna May lay in the narrow bed, wrapped in clean blankets that smelled of sage and sunshine. The mattress was stuffed with fresh straw, softer than anything she'd slept on in years. Still, sleep eluded her. Every creak of the cabin's timbers made her tense. She'd never spent a night alone with a man before, and despite Tashunka's gentleness, old fears died hard. She heard him moving quietly around the cabin, banking the fire for the night. His footsteps approached, and she held her breath. But he only paused near the bed, his voice low and reassuring. "You're safe here, Anna May. No one will harm you. Rest now." Tears pricked at her eyes as she heard him settle into his bedroll near the stove. The simple kindness in his words wrapped around her like a warm blanket, and eventually exhaustion pulled her into sleep. Morning came with the crow of a distant rooster. Anna May woke to find Tashunka already up, coffee brewing on the stove. After a breakfast of cornbread and more beans, he led her outside. "Time to learn about the stock," he said, heading toward the corral. The morning air was crisp, and dew sparkled on the grass. 2 horses lifted their heads as they approached, one bay, one dappled gray. Tashunka showed her how to approach them slowly, speaking in soft tones. Hold your hand out flat, he demonstrated. Let them come to you. Anna May's heart raced as the bay horse stretched its neck toward her palm. Its velvet nose tickled her skin, and a small laugh escaped her lips, the first in longer than she could remember. That's Thunder, Tashunka said, a smile touching his eyes. He's got a gentle spirit. Throughout the morning, he taught her the basics of caring for the horses, how to brush them, check their hooves, and measure feed. Anna May absorbed every word, grateful for work that didn't leave bruises. But as the sun climbed higher, her movements became hesitant. The reality of her situation weighed heavily. Here she was, learning new skills, sleeping in a real bed, while the other children still suffered. And could she really trust this man's kindness to last? Tashunka seemed to sense her turmoil. Takes time to trust, he said quietly, watching her brush Thunder's coat. Took me time too, after everything my people been through. But trust, like anything worth having, grows stronger when you tend it right. Anna May's hand stilled on the horse's flank. I'm trying, she whispered, and she meant it. Despite her fears, despite the guilt, something inside her wanted desperately to believe in this new life. The autumn days settled into a gentle rhythm at Tashunka's ranch. Each morning, Anna May woke to the smell of coffee and the soft sounds of Tashunka stoking the fire. The routine brought a peace she had never known before. One crisp morning, as they worked together in the corral, Anna May watched Tashunka gentle a young colt. His movements were slow and deliberate, his voice a steady murmur of Apache words that seemed to calm the nervous animal. "What are you saying to him?" she asked, leaning against the fence. Tashunka smiled, his hand running along the colt's neck. "Old words from my grandfather. He taught me that horses understand the heart more than the voice." Anna May nodded, thinking of how Tashunka's quiet strength had gentled her own fears over the past weeks. She had learned to brush the horses without flinching, to feed the chickens without dropping eggs in fear, to sleep through the night without startling at every sound. "My grandfather was a medicine man," Tashunka continued, securing the colt's lead rope. "He believed in healing more than fighting. Even after the soldiers came, he sought peace." "What happened to him?" Anna May asked softly. "Fever took him. 3 winters ago." Tashunka's eyes grew distant. "But his wisdom stays with me. He taught me that true strength lies in how we treat those weaker than ourselves." The words hung in the air between them, and Anna May felt tears prick at her eyes. She understood now why Tashunka had paid so much to free her from the store owner's grip. Their days fell into a comfortable pattern. Mornings were for tending the animals, feeding chickens, exercising horses, checking fences. Afternoons brought different tasks, repairing tools, preserving food for winter, cleaning tack. Tashunka taught her everything with endless patience, never raising his voice, never showing frustration when she made mistakes. But their peace was shattered one afternoon when hoofbeats approached the cabin. A young boy from town, Tommy Wilson, rode up on his pony, clutching a paper in his hand. "Mr. Tashunka," he called out, breathless. "Pa sent me with this. Says it's important." Tashunka took the paper, his expression darkening as he read. Anna May felt her heart squeeze tight, remembering how similar papers had brought bad news to the store in the past. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Mr. Harrison," Tashunka said, naming the store owner, "has filed papers with the court. Claims you're still legally under his care. Says I had no right to buy your freedom." Anna May's legs went weak. She grabbed the corral fence for support, the rough wood grounding her as memories of the store flooded back. The endless work, the harsh punishments, the hungry children. "The court date is set for next week," Tashunka continued, his voice tight with anger. "But I won't let him take you back. We'll fight this." Anna May shook her head, fear closing her throat. "You don't know him like I do. He has friends in town, important friends, and he never loses." "Neither do I," Tashunka said firmly. "I have friends too. McAllister will help, and the truth is on our side." But Anna May wasn't so sure. She had seen Harrison destroy other lives, had watched him twist the law to suit his needs. The thought of facing him in court made her stomach churn. Maybe, she whispered, maybe it would be easier to just go back, before more trouble comes. Tashunka crossed the space between them in 2 long strides. His hands gripped the fence on either side of her, not touching but protecting. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and intense. "You are not property. You are not going back to that life. I bought your freedom fair and square, and I have the papers to prove it. But the court will hear the truth. And if they don't listen," his jaw set firmly, "then we'll find another way, I promise you this. You will never be under his control again." Anna May looked up into Tashunka's face, saw the determination in his dark eyes. For the first time, she understood that his gentle nature masked a core of steel. He would fight for her, risk everything for her freedom. The realization both frightened and strengthened her. Tommy Wilson shifted uncomfortably on his pony. "Pa says to tell you he'll testify if you need him. He saw how Harrison treated them kids." Tashunka nodded. "Thank your father for me, Tommy. Tell him we'll need all the help we can get." As the boy rode away, Anna May felt the weight of the coming battle settle over the ranch. The peace they had built seemed suddenly fragile, threatened by the shadow of her past. But Tashunka's presence beside her remained steady, a reminder that she was no longer alone in her fight. The wooden steps of the town hall creaked under Tashunka's boots as he climbed toward the entrance. Morning sunlight caught the dust motes dancing in the air, and the familiar sounds of the town. Wagon wheels on dirt, horses nickering, shop doors opening, filled the crisp autumn air. Inside, the clerk's spectacles flashed as he looked up from his paperwork. His welcoming smile faded when he recognized Tashunka. "Can I help you?" The clerk's voice held a note of wariness. "I'm here about the Harrison case," Tashunka said, keeping his voice steady. "Regarding Anna May." The clerk shuffled through some papers, avoiding eye contact. "Ah, yes, that matter." He cleared his throat. "You should know, Mr. Tashunka, that the territorial laws are specific about property rights and citizenship status." "Anna May is not property," Tashunka said firmly. "I have the bill of sale, signed and witnessed." "Yes, well," the clerk adjusted his spectacles. "The court may view things differently, given your situation." From the corner of the room, a familiar voice spoke up. "He's right, Tashunka." Jim Baker, an old acquaintance from Tashunka's ranching days, stepped forward. His face showed concern, but his eyes held distance that hadn't been there in the past. "Times are changing," Jim continued. "Folks are nervous about Indians buying and selling, even those of us who know you." He trailed off, looking uncomfortable. Tashunka felt the weight of their stares, the subtle shift of bodies away from him. These were men he'd worked alongside, shared meals with. Now they looked at him as if he were a stranger. Back at the ranch, Anna May sat on the porch steps, watching the horizon where Tashunka had disappeared hours ago. The freedom to simply sit, to watch the clouds drift across the sky, still felt strange. Her hands, usually busy with endless tasks, lay idle in her lap. Freedom. The word tumbled through her mind like a stone in a stream. Was this freedom? Trading one man's authority for another's? Tashunka's kindness seemed genuine, but she'd seen kindness turn to cruelty before. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her tense, but it was only Tashunka returning from town. His face was grave as he dismounted. "The town hall visit didn't go well," he said, settling beside her on the steps. The wood creaked beneath their combined weight. "They won't help us?" Anna May asked, though she already knew the answer. "They don't see me as having the right to buy your freedom." His voice was quiet but carried an edge of anger. "Because I'm Apache." Anna May wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the familiar cold grip of fear. Maybe this is too much trouble. for both of us." Tashunka turned to face her fully. "Tell me what you're thinking. All of it." The words spilled out before she could stop them. "I barely know you. Everyone in town thinks I've just traded one owner for another. And maybe they're right. Maybe there's no such thing as real freedom for someone like me." "Someone like you?" Tashunka's voice was gentle. "A nobody. A mixed-race orphan who's never belonged anywhere." Tashunka was quiet for a long moment, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of experience. "When I first left my people to work for the white ranchers, many said I was foolish, that I would never truly belong in their world. They were right. I didn't belong in their world. But I learned to create my own path between worlds." He turned to her, his eyes serious. "You don't have to belong to their world either. You can create your own way, make your own choices. That's what real freedom is." "But the court case," Anna May began. "Will be difficult," he finished, "but worth fighting. Not just for us, but for others who might come after. Will you stand with me?" Anna May looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the strength in his face, the determination in his eyes, and something else. Hope, not just for himself, but for her. Slowly she nodded. "Yes," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Yes, I'll stand with you." The setting sun painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage across the ranch. Tomorrow would bring its own battles. But for now, they sat together in the growing darkness, two souls finding strength in their shared determination to fight for what was right. The courthouse stood tall against the morning sky, its wooden walls weathered by years of sun and wind. Inside, the benches creaked with the weight of townsfolk who had come to witness the hearing. Anna May sat beside Tashunka, her hands clasped tightly in her lap to hide their trembling. Judge Peterson adjusted his spectacles, peering down at the documents before him. The businessman, Mr. Harrison, sat at the opposite table with his lawyer, both men wearing expressions of smug confidence. "The court will now hear arguments regarding the matter of Anna May's guardianship," the judge announced, his voice echoing in the hushed room. Harrison's lawyer stood first, his polished boots clicking against the wooden floor. "Your Honor, my client has been a pillar of this community for 20 years. He provided food, shelter, and work to numerous orphaned children. The defendant, an Indian with questionable standing, has no right to interfere with established business arrangements." Tashunka rose slowly, his tall frame commanding attention despite the whispers that rippled through the courtroom. "Your Honor, I've lived and worked in this territory for many years. I earned my wages honestly, working alongside men who now sit in this very room." He gestured to the gathered crowd. "I've faced unfair treatment at every turn, been denied service at stores, refused rooms at hotels, watched as my money was questioned, even though it was earned through honest labor." His voice carried the weight of years of injustice. "But I persevered because I believe in justice. And what Mr. Harrison did to Anna May and those children isn't justice. It's cruelty wearing the mask of charity." The businessman's lawyer jumped to his feet. "Objection! This emotional appeal has no bearing on the legal matter at hand." "Sustained," the judge said, though his eyes lingered on Tashunka thoughtfully. Harrison's lawyer produced a stack of papers. "Your Honor, I have documentation showing that my client can provide Anna May with proper accommodations, regular meals, and suitable employment. Can the defendant offer the same guarantees?" "I can offer her freedom," Tashunka replied firmly, "the right to choose her own path." "The court calls Anna May to testify," the judge announced. Anna May's legs felt weak as she approached the front of the courtroom. The oath was administered, and she faced the sea of faces before her. She caught sight of Harrison's cold smile and felt her throat tighten. "Tell us about your life at Mr. Harrison's establishment," the lawyer prompted. Anna May's voice trembled at first, then grew stronger. "I was 7 years old when Mr. Harrison bought me from the orphanage. He said I would have a good home." She paused, steadying herself. Instead, I worked from sunrise to sunset. We all did, all the children. If we were too slow or made mistakes, we went without food. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Harrison's face darkened. There were nights I couldn't sleep because my hands were so raw from scrubbing floors, Anna May continued. Children who got sick were sent away. We never knew what happened to them. Her voice cracked. That wasn't a home. It was a prison. The businessman stood abruptly. She's lying. I gave these ungrateful children everything. His face had turned red with anger. Your Honor, I demand you put an end to these false accusations. I have contracts, documentation. Documents bought with the same money you used to buy children? Tushunka's quiet question cut through Harrison's outburst. The businessman lunged forward. You have no right to interfere with my business. These children are my property. A shocked silence fell over the courtroom. Harrison's lawyer tugged at his client's sleeve, trying to quiet him, but the damage was done. The businessman's mask had slipped, revealing the cruel truth beneath. Anna May stood straighter, her voice clear and strong. I am not property. None of us were. We were children who needed help, and you took advantage of that need. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, Tushunka bought my freedom, yes. But he did it to give me a choice, something Mr. Harrison never offered any of us. The courtroom buzzed with tension as Harrison's lawyer made a final desperate attempt. Your Honor, regardless of these emotional appeals, the law is clear regarding property rights and contracts. These are children, Counselor, the judge interrupted, his voice sharp, not property. And I believe we've heard enough to... I demand you enforce my rights, Harrison shouted, his face purple with rage. I'll take this to a higher court. I'll have that Indian arrested for theft. I'll dash. The days after the court hearing dragged on like molasses in winter. Anna May stood at the ranch house window, watching storm clouds gather on the horizon. The wait for the judge's ruling felt endless, each day bringing new whispers from town that made her stomach knot with worry. Tushunka worked the ranch as if nothing had changed, but Anna May noticed the tension in his shoulders. He spent longer hours in the barn, mending things that didn't need mending, keeping his hands busy while his mind worked through their troubles. More talk in town today, he said one evening, hanging his hat by the door. Harrison's been busy spreading stories. Anna May's hands stilled over the pot of stew she was stirring. What kind of stories? The kind meant to paint me as a threat. Tushunka's voice was steady, but his eyes carried a weight of resignation. Some folks who used to tip their hats to me now cross the street when they see me coming. The businessman's whispers had done their work well. Tales of Anna May's past, twisted versions that made her sound wayward rather than victimized, circulated through the town like wildfire. Even worse were the rumors about Tushunka, suggesting dark motives behind his purchase of Anna May's freedom. One morning they rode into town for supplies, and Anna May felt the stares burning into her back. Women pulled their children closer as they passed. Men who had once greeted Tushunka with friendly nods now turned away, suddenly fascinated by their boot tips or the distant mountains. Don't let it trouble you, Tushunka said softly, noting her distress. People fear what they don't understand. But understanding seemed to arrive in the form of Carl McAllister, a weather-beaten rancher who had employed Tushunka years before. He found them loading supplies into their wagon, his boots kicking up dust as he approached. Been hearing a lot of nonsense lately, McAllister said, pushing his hat back. Reckon it's time somebody spoke some truth. Tushunka straightened, studying his old friend's face. Truth's been in short supply these days. That's why I'm heading to the judge's office, McAllister declared. Going to tell him about the man I know you to be. About how you worked harder than any hand I ever hired. How you nursed my cattle through that blue tongue outbreak when others gave up. Anna May watched hope flicker across Tushunka's usually stoic features. You don't have to do this, Tushunka said. Harrison has friends in high places. McAllister spat in the dust. Harrison's got money in high places. Ain't the same as having friends." He adjusted his gun belt. "I've watched that man buy and sell children for years, telling myself it wasn't my business. Well, I'm making it my business now." True to his word, McAllister testified before the judge that very afternoon. His words carried weight. He was a respected rancher, a man whose opinion mattered in the community. He spoke of Tushunka's integrity, his skill with horses, his quiet strength of character. "I've known Indians, and I've known white men," McAllister told the judge. "Some good, some bad on both sides. But I never met a man more honorable than Tushunka, regardless of his blood." The testimony seemed to shift something in the town's atmosphere. Other voices began to rise, questioning Harrison's version of events. People who had worked with Tushunka over the years stepped forward with similar stories of his character. But Harrison wasn't finished. That evening, as Tushunka and Anna Mae returned to the ranch, they found a note nailed to their door. Anna Mae's hands shook as she read the crude message aloud. "Drop the case or watch it all burn," she whispered, the paper trembling in her grip. Tushunka took the note, his jaw tightening as he studied the threatening words. The setting sun cast long shadows across the ranch, making every dark corner seem menacing. "He won't stop," Anna Mae said, her voice small. "He'll destroy everything you've built." Tushunka's hand found hers, warm and steady. "Buildings can be rebuilt. Freedom, once lost, is harder to reclaim." That night, they took turns keeping watch, the darkness alive with possibilities. Every creak of the windmill, every distant coyote's cry made Anna Mae's heart race. But Tushunka remained calm, his presence an anchor in the storm of uncertainty. "Whatever comes," he told her, as they watched the sunrise paint the sky in shades of hope, "we face it together." The courthouse buzzed with tension as Judge Stevens settled into his chair. Morning light filtered through dusty windows, casting long shadows across the wooden floor. Anna Mae sat beside Tushunka, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, trying to still their trembling. "All rise," called the bailiff, his voice echoing through the packed room. The businessman Harrison stood at his table, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. His expensive suit and polished boots spoke of wealth and influence, a stark contrast to Tushunka's simple ranching clothes. Judge Stevens cleared his throat, shuffling through the papers before him. "I've heard testimony from all parties involved," he began, his weathered face grave. "This case has brought to light several uncomfortable truths about our community." Anna Mae felt Tushunka's steady presence beside her, drawing strength from his calm demeanor. The past weeks of uncertainty had worn on them both, but his resolve had never wavered. "Before I render my decision," the judge continued, "does anyone wish to make a final statement?" Harrison's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. His face had turned an ugly shade of red. "Your Honor, this is absurd," he spat. "That girl is my property, purchased fair and square." He turned toward Anna Mae, taking 3 menacing steps in her direction. "And if you think you can just walk away—" The threat hung in the air as Harrison reached toward Anna Mae. Several gasps echoed through the courtroom. But before he could get any closer, Tushunka rose to his full height, placing himself between Harrison and Anna Mae. His movement was fluid, purposeful, without aggression, but radiating protective strength. "You will not touch her," Tushunka said, his voice quiet but firm enough to carry through the silent courtroom. Harrison's face twisted with rage. "You savage!" "That is enough!" Judge Stevens' gavel crashed down. "Mr. Harrison, you will return to your seat immediately, or I will have you removed from this courtroom." The businessman faltered, his momentum broken by the judge's sharp command. The townspeople watched, many seeing for the first time the true nature of both men. Harrison's cruel desperation and Tushunka's dignified courage. "I have seen everything I need to see," Judge Stevens declared, his voice heavy with authority. "The law may be imperfect, but it exists to protect the vulnerable from those who would abuse power." He fixed Harrison with a stern gaze. "Your claim of ownership over Miss Anna May is hereby rejected." Anna May's breath caught in her throat. Beside her, Tushunka remained standing, still and watchful. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "this court recognizes her as a free person, with all the rights and protections thereof." He turned his attention to Tushunka. "Mr. Tushunka has demonstrated not only the means to provide for her welfare, but also the character to ensure her safety and dignity." Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. From the back, several of the town's wealthy landowners stood and walked out, their faces dark with disapproval. Harrison's supporters followed suit, casting angry glances at the judge's bench. "This is an outrage," Harrison sputtered. "You can't—" "I can and I have," Judge Stevens cut him off. "This case is closed." The gavel fell one final time, the sound sharp and definitive. Anna May felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Tushunka's hand found her shoulder, offering quiet support as always. Around them, the courtroom began to empty, though tension still hung thick in the air. McAllister approached them, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Justice done at last," he said, extending his hand to Tushunka, "though I reckon some folks won't take kindly to it." Through the courthouse windows they could see Harrison conferring with several well-dressed men, their angry gestures and dark looks making their feelings clear. "The law's the law," Tushunka replied simply, though his eyes remained alert. "That's all that matters today." Anna May stood, her legs shaky but her heart full. For the first time in her life she was truly free, not just from Harrison's ownership, but from the fear that had defined her existence for so long. She looked up at Tushunka, seeing in his eyes the same quiet joy she felt in her heart. The victory was theirs, but as they prepared to leave the courthouse, the hostile stares from Harrison's supporters reminded them that not everyone would accept this new reality. The path ahead would not be easy, but at least now they could walk it together, as free people under the law. The journey back to the ranch felt longer than usual. Dust kicked up behind their wagon as Tushunka guided the horses along the familiar trail. Anna May sat beside him, her freedom papers clutched tightly in her lap, but the victory felt hollow against the weight of angry stares that had followed them from town. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the prairie grass. Neither of them had spoken much since leaving the courthouse. The clatter of wagon wheels and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats filled the silence between them. "Reckon we ought to celebrate," Tushunka finally said, his voice gentle against the growing dusk. "You're free now, proper and legal?" Anna May managed a small smile, though her heart felt heavy. "Don't feel much like celebrating," she admitted, "the way those men looked at us in town." She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. They passed the Wilsons' farm, where Mrs. Wilson had always waved from her garden. Today she hurried inside at the sight of their wagon, pulling her young son along with her. The door slammed shut behind them. At the ranch, Tushunka helped Anna May down from the wagon. The familiar sight of their home should have brought comfort, but something felt different now. The victory that had seemed so complete in the courthouse now felt fragile, like morning frost that wouldn't survive the heat of day. They settled into their evening routine, feeding the animals, checking the fences, preparing a simple supper. But every distant sound made Anna May jump. Every shadow at the window caused her heart to race. As night fell, voices carried across the yard. Anna May was washing dishes when she heard them, men's voices, one of them Tushunka's. She moved closer to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. "You ain't listening, Tushunka," came the urgent whisper of Jack Murphy, an old friend from Tushunka's ranching days. "Harrison's got half the county riled up. Sheriff ain't gonna step in if trouble comes." "This is my home," Tushunka replied, his voice firm but quiet. "I won't be driven off my own land." "Ain't about just you no more, is it?" Murphy's boots scraped against the dirt as he shifted his weight. "That girl in there, you fought hard to free her. But what good is freedom if she ain't alive to enjoy it?" Anna May's hands trembled as she dried a plate, straining to hear every word. Town's changing, friend, Murphy continued, and not for the better. Harrison's been talking to some dangerous men, the kind that ride at night, if you take my meaning. A long silence followed, broken only by the distant call of a coyote. Anna Mae's heart pounded so loud she feared they might hear it through the window. I appreciate the warning, Jack, Tashunka finally said, but running ain't the answer. Your Apache pride's gonna get you killed one of these days, Murphy sighed. The sound of his horse being mounted followed. Just watch your back, friend, and hers too. After Murphy rode away, Tashunka remained outside for a long while. When he finally came in, Anna Mae was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale in the lamplight. You heard? He said. It wasn't a question. She nodded, unable to meet his eyes. Maybe we should leave, she whispered. Find somewhere else, somewhere safer. Tashunka pulled out a chair and sat across from her. His face was troubled, but his voice remained steady. Running means they win, means everything we fought for in that courthouse today meant nothing. But if they come, then we'll face them, he said firmly. I didn't buy your freedom just to live in fear. We belong here, Anna Mae. This land, this home, it's ours by right. Tears welled in Anna Mae's eyes. I don't want to lose this. She gestured around the kitchen at the home they'd built together. But I don't want to lose you either. Tashunka reached across the table and took her hand. His calloused palm was warm against her skin. We fought the law and won. We can fight this too. His dark eyes held hers, filled with determination. But the choice must be yours. If you want to leave, we'll leave. Anna Mae looked around the kitchen, at the curtains she'd sewn herself, the herbs drying in bunches from the ceiling, the wooden spoons Tashunka had carved for her. This was home, the first real home she'd ever known. No, she said finally, squeezing his hand. We stay. We fight. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere in town, men might be gathering, making plans. But in the warm light of their kitchen, Anna Mae and Tashunka sat together, their joined hands a silent promise to face whatever came next. The morning sun had barely cleared the horizon when hoofbeats approached the ranch. Anna Mae's heart quickened at the sound, but Tashunka's calm demeanor as he looked out the window eased her worry. Just Jimmy from the telegraph office, he said, moving to the door. The young telegraph boy dismounted, wiping dust from his jacket. Message for you, Mr. Tashunka, he said, holding out a yellow envelope. From up Montana way. Tashunka took the telegram, pressing a coin into Jimmy's palm. The boy tipped his hat and rode off, leaving a trail of dust in his wake. Inside, Anna Mae watched as Tashunka's eyes moved across the paper. His expression shifted subtly, something she'd learned to read in their time together. What is it? She asked, setting down the dish towel she'd been holding. It's from Rancher McAllister, Tashunka said, his voice thoughtful. I worked his spread years back before returning to Apache territory. He handed her the telegram. Anna Mae read slowly, her finger tracing each word. Heard about your troubles, stop. Need good hand on my spread stop. FAIRPAYGOODLANDNOPREJUDICEHERESTOP. Bring the girl plenty work for both. Stop. Reply soon if interested. Stop. Her hands trembled slightly as she set the paper down. Montana, she whispered. The word felt foreign on her tongue, like something from a storybook. It's good land up there, Tashunka said quietly. McAllister's a fair man. Treated me like any other worker when others wouldn't. Anna Mae moved to the window, looking out at the familiar view, the garden she'd planted, the chicken coop she'd helped build. I've never been further than the next town over, she admitted. Tashunka came to stand beside her. Sometimes the hardest step is the first one, he said. But we can't stay here, Anna Mae. Not with things the way they are? She nodded, but her chest felt tight. What What if we get there and it's not what we hoped? What if Dash? What if it's better? Tashunka interrupted gently. McAllister builds community, not walls. His ranch hands come from everywhere, Mexico, Ireland, even a few Apache like me. People work together there, share meals, help each other's families. Anna Mae turned to face him. Sounds like a fairy tale. It's real enough, he assured her. I've seen it, lived it. They spent that evening on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. The air was cool, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Anna Mae wrapped a shawl around her shoulders, thinking about all the sunsets she'd watched from this very spot. Tell me more about Montana, she said finally. Tashunka smiled, his eyes distant with memory. Big sky country. The mountains touch the clouds. Grass grows tall enough to hide a horse in some places. Winters are harsh, but the people help each other through. No one stands alone there. No one stands alone, Anna Mae repeated softly. The words settled something in her heart, like a key turning in a lock. They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear. A coyote called in the distance, and somewhere an owl answered. I'm scared, Anna Mae admitted finally, but I'm more scared of staying here, waiting for trouble to find us. Tashunka reached over and took her hand. Fear is natural, but so is hope. She squeezed his hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. Then I reckon we should send a telegram in the morning. The next day dawned clear and bright. They rode into town early, before most folks were about. Tashunka sent their reply to McAllister while Anna Mae waited outside with the horses. Offer accepted, stop. We'll start north in 3 days. Stop. Grateful for opportunity. Stop. Back at the ranch, they began the work of packing up their life. Each item they wrapped and stored away felt like both an ending and a beginning. Anna Mae folded the curtains she'd sewn, packed away the dishes they'd shared meals on, carefully wrapped the wooden spoons Tashunka had carved. It's strange, she said, holding a cup she'd used every morning for months. I was so afraid to come here at first. Now I'm afraid to leave. Tashunka paused in his own packing. That's how you know it became home, he said. But home isn't just a place. It's the people you share it with. Anna Mae nodded, carefully wrapping the cup in cloth. Then I reckon we'll make a new home in Montana. Together, Tashunka agreed. Outside, the sun climbed higher, promising another hot day. But for the first time in weeks, the heat felt less oppressive. Change was coming, as surely as the seasons turned. And though uncertainty lay ahead, they would face it side by side, moving toward a future where they could both truly belong. Dark clouds gathered on the horizon as Tashunka and Anna Mae made their way north. The wagon wheels creaked under their belongings, and their horses plodded steadily along the dusty trail. The wind picked up, carrying the sharp scent of rain. Storm's coming, Tashunka said, scanning the darkening sky. Bigger than I thought. Anna Mae pulled her shawl tighter. How far to the next town? Too far. Tashunka pointed to a ridge ahead. But there's a line shack about a mile up, used by cowboys during roundup. Should be empty this time of year. The first heavy drops fell as they reached the simple wooden structure. Tashunka helped Anna Mae down from the wagon, and quickly led the horses under a lean-to attached to the shack's side. Thunder rolled across the sky as they carried their essential supplies inside. The line shack was small but solid, with a pot-bellied stove in one corner and a narrow bunk along the wall. Dust covered everything, but it was dry and secure. Tashunka got a fire going while Anna Mae swept the floor with a worn broom she found by the door. Rain drummed against the roof as wind howled through the cracks. Anna Mae jumped at a particularly loud crack of thunder. "Sounds angry out there," she said, settling onto a wooden crate near the stove. Tashunka nodded, adding another piece of wood to the fire. "Reminds me of nights during the wars. We'd huddle in caves, listening to storms like this." Anna Mae watched the firelight play across his face. You never talk much about those days. No good memories there, he said quietly. Lost many friends. Family, too. He stared into the flames. But war taught me something important. There's always a choice between violence and peace. And you chose peace, Anna May said softly. Every day? Tushonka looked up at her. Even when others make it hard, even when they push you toward anger. Lightning flashed, illuminating the small space. Anna May hugged her knees to her chest. I understand that. Back at the store, some days I wanted to fight back, to hurt him like he hurt us. Her voice trembled. But I was afraid, always afraid. Fear kept you alive, Tushonka said, but it doesn't have to rule you anymore. The storm raged outside, but inside the shack, something shifted between them. Words that had been held back for months began to flow. Anna May spoke of her childhood memories, fragments of a mother's love, then the crushing loneliness of the orphanage. The day the businessman bought her, promising a good home, but delivering only work and pain. Years of watching other children come and go, some finding homes, others disappearing into the night. Tushonka listened, his presence steady and strong. When she finished, he shared his own story, growing up proud among his people, the shock of first seeing cavalry soldiers on their land, the years of fighting, not for glory but survival, then meeting rancher McAllister, who showed him another way. He taught me that true strength isn't in how many enemies you defeat, Tushonka said, but in how many friends you make, how many lives you touch with kindness. The storm began to ease, rain softening to a gentle patter. Anna May moved closer to the fire, feeling its warmth deep in her bones. I was so wrong about you, she admitted. When you first bought my freedom, I thought you'd be like him. Another person wanting to own me. Never, Tushonka said firmly. Freedom isn't something one person can give another. It grows inside, like a seed breaking through hard ground. Dawn approached, painting the sky in gentle colors as the storm clouds retreated. They stepped outside to check on the horses. The air was clean and fresh, the world washed new. Look, Anna May pointed to the eastern sky. A rainbow arched across the horizon, its colors brilliant against the retreating storm. A good sign, Tushonka said, smiling. The storm has passed, but it left the earth stronger. They loaded the wagon and set out again, the muddy trail already beginning to dry in the morning sun. Anna May felt different, lighter somehow. The storm had washed away more than just dust. It had cleared away the last of her doubts about their journey together. Ahead lay Montana and a new life waiting to be built. But the real change had happened in that small line shack where two wounded souls had shared their stories and emerged stronger, united by understanding and trust. The morning sun painted the Montana sky in shades of gold as Tushonka and Anna May's wagon rolled into the new town. Weathered wooden buildings lined the main street, their fresh-painted signs gleaming. The familiar sounds of frontier life filled the air, horses nickering, wagon wheels creaking, and the cheerful greetings of townspeople going about their morning business. Anna May sat straighter on the wagon seat, taking in the peaceful scene. It feels different here, she said softly. Tushonka nodded, his eyes scanning the street. People look you in the eye here, not down at the ground. As if to prove his point, a group of ranchers outside the general store tipped their hats respectfully as the wagon passed. One of them, a weather-beaten man with kind eyes, stepped forward. You must be Tushonka, he called out. McAllister sent word you'd be coming. I'm James Morton, run the Double M spread north of town. Tushonka climbed down from the wagon and shook the man's hand, much obliged for the welcome. We need good hands here, Morton said, glancing appreciatively at the way Tushonka handled the horses. Got 40 head needs moving to summer pasture, if you're looking for work. The offer was made simply, without hesitation or prejudice. Tushonka's shoulders relaxed slightly. I'd be glad for the work. Anna May watched from the wagon as more townspeople gathered. A woman in a flour-dusted apron emerged from the bakery, carrying a wrapped loaf of fresh bread. "Welcome to Silver Creek," she said warmly, handing the bread to Anna May. "I'm Sarah Morton. You must be tired from your journey." Anna May accepted the gift with trembling hands, unused to such kindness from strangers. "Thank you, ma'am." "None of that ma'am business," Sarah smiled. "Come by the bakery tomorrow. I could use help with the morning baking if you're interested." The days that followed were filled with small miracles of ordinary kindness. Tashunka proved his worth on the range, earning the respect of fellow cowboys through his quiet competence. Anna May found joy in working at the bakery, where Sarah taught her to shape loaves and make the flakiest pie crusts in 3 territories. The town embraced them both, seeing past surface differences to recognize their true worth. At church socials and town gatherings, people sought out their company, eager to hear stories of their journey. Anna May's quiet strength and survival touched hearts, while Tashunka's dignity and wisdom earned genuine respect. But their peace was shattered one autumn morning when a rider galloped into town, kicking up dust as he reined in hard outside the sheriff's office. The news he carried was grim. The businessman hadn't forgotten his humiliation. He'd hired a gang of rough men, promising them good money to drive Tashunka out and destroy everything he'd built. The sheriff called a town meeting that evening. The lamplight cast long shadows in the meeting hall as he delivered the warning. 3 men were seen heading this way, he announced gravely. Mean bunch, asking questions about our new residents. Word is they're being paid to cause trouble. A murmur of concern rippled through the crowd. Anna May's hands twisted in her skirt as old fears threatened to overwhelm her. But then something remarkable happened. James Morton stood up. "Tashunka's one of us now. Any man comes looking to harm him, or Miss Anna May will answer to all of us." "That's right," Sarah added firmly. "We take care of our own here." More voices joined in, offering support and protection. The town doctor promised to keep watch from his second-story window. The blacksmith volunteered his sons for guard duty. Even the telegraph operator said he'd send warnings up and down the line about the troublemakers. Tashunka stood silent, overwhelmed by this show of solidarity. Anna May reached for his hand, drawing strength from his steady presence. "We won't run," she said quietly, surprising herself with her own determination. "Not this time." The businessman's hired men were spotted 2 days later, making camp in a grove of cottonwoods outside town. Their presence cast a shadow over the community's peace, but it also revealed the depth of Silver Creek's unity. Ranchers rode in pairs now, watching the back trails. The town organized signals. 3 rings of the church bell would warn of trouble. The threat hung in the air like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. But unlike before, Tashunka and Anna May didn't face it alone. They had found more than just a new home. They had found a community willing to stand with them against whatever darkness approached. The autumn wind whistled through Silver Creek's main street as 3 riders approached from the east. Their horses' hooves kicked up dust, casting long shadows in the late afternoon sun. Tashunka stood on the boardwalk outside the general store, his tall frame steady as stone. Anna May's presence beside him gave him strength he hadn't known he needed. The hired guns drew closer, their intentions clear in the way they carried themselves, shoulders tight, hands hovering near their weapons. The middle rider, a scarred man with cold eyes, pulled his horse to a stop 20 paces from where Tashunka stood. "We got business with you, Apache," the man called out, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet street. Tashunka didn't move. "My business is my own." "Not according to the man paying us," the rider sneered. "He says you took something that belongs to him." Anna May tensed beside Tashunka, but her voice rang clear. "I belong to no one." Movement caught Tashunka's eye. Along the street, townspeople were emerging from shops and buildings. James Morton appeared from the livery stable, his sons flanking him. Sarah Morton stood in the bakery doorway, arms crossed, The sheriff stepped out onto the street, badge glinting in the sun. "You boys might want to reconsider your position," the sheriff said calmly. "You're outnumbered." The scarred man's eyes narrowed as he counted the gathering crowd. "This ain't your fight." "That's where you're wrong," James Morton spoke up, moving to stand beside Tashunka. "These folks are part of our town now." Tashunka stepped forward, his voice carrying the wisdom of his people. "There need not be violence here today. Your employer seeks revenge, but he has no power over us anymore." "Tell that to the money in our pockets," one of the other riders spat. "Money bought with cruelty," Tashunka replied. "Is that the path you choose to walk?" The words hung in the air like thunder before lightning. The hired guns shifted uncomfortably in their saddles as more townspeople gathered. The blacksmith and his apprentices emerged from their shop, carrying their hammers. The general store owner and his wife stood firm on their porch. Even old Mrs. Peterson, who taught at the schoolhouse, joined the group, her chin lifted high. "Look around you," Anna May said, her voice stronger than she'd ever heard it. "This is what community looks like. This is what freedom means." The scarred man's hand twitched toward his gun, but he froze as the sound of rifles being cocked echoed from multiple directions. Ranch hands had positioned themselves on nearby rooftops, their weapons trained on the three riders. "Your employer's reach ends here," Tashunka declared. "These good people have shown me that there is more strength in unity than in fear, more power in kindness than in cruelty." The second rider, younger than the others, looked increasingly uncertain. "Jack," he muttered to the scarred man, "maybe we ought to—" "Quiet," Jack snapped, but his authority was crumbling. Sarah Morton stepped forward, her voice clear and firm. "You can ride back and tell your employer that Silver Creek protects its own. Tashunka and Anna May have found their home here. Any man who threatens them threatens all of us." The third rider was already turning his horse. The younger one followed suit, leaving their leader increasingly isolated. Jack's face twisted with frustration as he realized his position was untenable. "This ain't over," he growled, but the threat sounded hollow. "It is over," Tashunka replied quietly. "Your employer's power was built on fear. Here, he will find none." The scarred man held Tashunka's gaze for a long moment before yanking his horse's reins. The animal spun, and all three riders galloped away, their retreat marked by the thunder of hooves and billowing dust. As the riders disappeared into the distance, the tension broke. Sarah hurried forward to embrace Anna May, while James clapped Tashunka on the shoulder. The sheriff nodded in approval, and the townspeople began to disperse, though many lingered to offer words of support. "Never seen anything like it," the sheriff mused. "A fight won without a single shot fired." Tashunka looked at Anna May, saw the pride shining in her eyes. Sometimes the strongest weapon is the truth spoken by many voices. The autumn wind continued to blow, but now it carried the scent of victory. Not the bitter taste of gunpowder, but the sweet flavor of unity and courage. The businessman's power had indeed crumbled, defeated not by violence but by the strength of a community standing together. The spring sun warmed the freshly tilled earth as Anna May walked the fence line of their new property. 6 months had passed since the confrontation in town, and the land was beginning to show signs of their careful stewardship. Young corn stalks pushed through the dark soil in neat rows, and the newly constructed barn housed 4 milk cows and a small flock of chickens. Tashunka worked nearby, mending a section of fence. His strong hands moved with practiced efficiency, each post set firmly in the ground. He paused to wipe his brow, catching Anna May's eye with a gentle smile that still made her heart skip. "The north field's ready for planting," she called out, her voice carrying easily across the morning air. "Sarah Morton brought over some vegetable seeds yesterday. Says they'll do well in our soil." Tashunka nodded, pleased. "The Mortons have been good neighbors. James helped me find those Hereford cattle we'll be getting next month." Their farm was modest but growing. The little house they'd built together stood proudly on a small rise, its windows gleaming in the morning light. Smoke curled from the chimney where Anna May had started breakfast before dawn, a habit she'd chosen for herself, not one forced upon her. In town, they were becoming known for their hard work and fair dealings. Anna May sold eggs and butter at the general store, while Tushunka's knowledge of horses had earned him respect among the local ranchers. Their differences, once a source of suspicion, now sparked curiosity and admiration. "Remember when we first saw this land?" Anna May asked, joining Tushunka at the fence. "It was all overgrown, hardly looked like much." "Like us," Tushunka replied softly. "Sometimes what appears broken just needs care to flourish." They worked side by side through the morning, their movements in sync from months of shared labor. Anna May had learned to drive the plow team, while Tushunka handled the heavier tasks. When decisions needed making, they made them together, their partnership strengthened by mutual respect. The afternoon brought visitors, the Morton children delivering a fresh-baked pie, the sheriff stopping by to discuss the upcoming cattle drive, neighbors sharing news and seeking advice. Each interaction reinforced their place in the community, healing old wounds with new connections. As evening approached, they stood together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Their land stretched before them, no longer just acres to be worked, but a home they'd created together. The sweet scent of blooming wildflowers drifted on the breeze, mixing with the earthy smell of freshly turned soil. "This is what freedom truly means," Anna May said softly, her hand finding Tushunka's. "Not just being free from something, but being free to build something new." Tushunka squeezed her hand gently. "We have built more than a farm here. We have built a future." The golden light of late afternoon stretched across their fields, painting the wheat in shades of amber and gold. Anna May and Tushunka walked together between the rows of corn, their footsteps in perfect rhythm after months of working side by side. The stalks stood tall and proud, a testament to their shared labor and dedication. "Remember when this was all just wild grass?" Anna May asked, running her hand along the rough leaves of the corn. Her voice carried the warmth of contentment, so different from the fearful whispers of her past. Tushunka nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon where their property met the sky. "The land knows when it's loved," he said softly. "It gives back what we put into it." They passed the new irrigation ditch they'd dug together, the water flowing clean and steady. Beyond it, the Robertson family's children played near the fence line, their laughter carrying across the field. It wasn't long ago that such a scene would have been unthinkable. Their families sharing space, breaking bread together, helping one another through hard times. Anna May paused near the old oak tree where they'd first planned their farm. "I used to think freedom meant running away," she said, her voice steady and sure. "But you showed me it means having the strength to stay and build something meaningful." Tushunka turned to her, his expression gentle. "You built this too, Anna May. Your courage made it possible." They walked on, passing the barn where the town's first integrated harvest festival had been held last fall. The memory of music, dancing, and shared meals still lingered in the air. The same townspeople who had once viewed them with suspicion now sought their advice on crops and cattle. "You didn't just save me that day in the store," Anna May said, stopping to face Tushunka. "You showed me what family could be, what love should be." Her eyes shone with unshed tears, but her smile was radiant. "You taught me about honor by living it every day." The setting sun cast long shadows across their land, but neither felt the darkness of the past anymore. Their home stood as a beacon of what was possible, when hearts opened and prejudices fell away. The town had changed with them, growing into a place where different cultures could thrive together. Standing in their fields, surrounded by the fruits of their labor, Anna May and Tushunka faced the horizon. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility. They had built more than a farm. They had created a sanctuary of hope, a testament to the power of love over fear, of unity over division. Together they watched the sun paint the sky in brilliant hues, their hearts full of the peace they had fought so hard to achieve. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced everything else, side by side, stronger together than apart. If something in this story whispered to your spirit, stay a while. Subscribe and come back tomorrow. The next story may be the one you didn't know you needed.